I conducted a diagnostic on my relationship by sleeping with someone else, and now everyone is calling me a monster. Okay, look, let's just get it on the table. Yes, I slept with Theo, but can we please, for the love of God, stop throwing around the word betrayal? It's so lazy. It's a label people slap on things they don't want to think about. This wasn't some cheap, emotional fling. It was a diagnostic. A controlled experiment, you know? I was gathering data, trying to isolate a variable that was missing between me and Kieran. Our relationship had a bug, a glitch in the system. Was I supposed to just let it crash? No, I ran a test. Theo was available data, that's it. And now Kieran is acting like I burned down his entire world. He won't even listen to my findings. The whole point was to improve us. Honestly, tell me I'm wrong. How can the attempt to find a solution be worse than the problem itself? It's his complete refusal to engage with the logic that's driving me insane. It just makes no sense. To be fair, you have to understand where I'm coming from. My entire job, my whole way of thinking, is about fixing things. I'm a user experience strategist. Companies pay me a lot of money to deconstruct user journeys, analyze why their perfect-on-paper products are failing to connect with real people. I look at user flows, I identify friction points, I find the hidden bugs that make people angry or bored, and then I design a solution. I don't just patch problems. I create elegant, intuitive systems. I make things better. It's what I do. And for 3 years, my relationship with Kieran was the most seamless, intuitive system I'd ever been a part of. He was, and I say this with all the love in the world, the perfect user. Stable, loyal, predictable in the best way. His inputs were consistent, his feedback was positive. He was the guy who'd remember I was having a stressful day and have my favorite takeout waiting for me. He'd listen for hours while I mapped out a complex user problem on our living room whiteboard. Our life together was this beautifully designed interface, easy, comfortable, efficient. But lately, God, it felt like we were in maintenance mode. The system had reached a plateau. The passion, the spontaneity, those were like premium features that had somehow been disabled after a software update. Our date nights became reruns of the same restaurant. Our conversations were looping scripts about work, groceries, and whose turn it was to take out the recycling. The user engagement was dropping, you know. The experience was becoming stale. And I love Kieran. I really, really do. Which is why I felt this massive responsibility to fix it. You don't just abandon a brilliant product because of a few performance issues. You iterate, you optimize, you release a new and improved version. Of course, I knew about his thing. His one non-negotiable red line. He'd told me about it early on, maybe 6 months in. We were having wine, and he just got very quiet and serious. He explained how his parents' marriage had just imploded after his dad cheated. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a detonation that left craters in his entire family. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Nicolette, I can handle almost anything. We can argue, we can disagree, we can have problems. But I need honesty, absolute fidelity. It's the one deal breaker for me." And I heard him. I promise I did. I processed that information. In my head, it got filed away as a critical piece of his user profile, like a historical pain point. I saw it as the root trauma that explained his need for stability, the foundational data that informed his user behavior. Okay, noted. User has severe negative association with infidelity trigger. What I didn't understand, apparently, was that it wasn't just data. It was the system's source code. It was the one line of code you absolutely, under no circumstances, ever touch. I saw it as another problem to be solved, another constraint to design around, not a self-destruct button. So I started approaching this like any other project. Emotional guesswork is inefficient. You need a solid methodology. The objective was clear. Reintroduce the excitement variable into the Kieran-Nicolette system and restore optimal user satisfaction. My first step was a competitive analysis. I observed other couples, the ones who still seemed to be in their launch phase. I read articles. I even tried to implement some quick fixes with Kieran. I designed Date Night 2, which involved a randomized activity generator. User adoption was high initially, but long-term retention was poor. The changes were superficial. They didn't address the core issue. The system's performance would spike for a day or two, then revert to its stale baseline. I was just patching the symptoms. I needed to understand the root cause, and for that, I needed a proper A/B test. I needed a control group. That's where Theo came in. Theo works in the marketing department, and he's basically the human equivalent of a disruptive startup. High energy, a bit chaotic, and obsessed with engagement. He's charming in that easy, uncomplicated way. He tells funny stories, he's impulsive, he remembers that you mentioned liking a specific kind of coffee 3 weeks ago. He was, in UX terms, the perfect, divergent user persona. He operated on a completely different OS than Kieran's steady, quiet presence. He was the ideal test case to isolate the variables we were missing. Honestly, the seduction, if you can even call it that, was methodical. I frame it in my head as a 3-phase research plan. Phase 1 was discovery and qualitative research. I started by engaging him in conversations at the office coffee machine, conducting informal ethnographic studies on his behavioral patterns. I wasn't flirting. I was analyzing his communication style for engagement triggers. Phase 2 was a controlled environment study. I suggested afterwork drinks, first with a group to observe him in a social ecosystem, then just the two of us for a one-on-one deep dive interview. The whole time, I was mentally taking notes. Okay, note the way he holds eye contact. That creates a sense of immediacy. Note the spontaneous compliment about my presentation. That's a low-effort, high-impact engagement metric. It was all just information. The night it happened was phase 3, live prototype interaction. It was a purely logical escalation of the research. We were at a bar, and he was being his usual charming self. I felt nothing. No butterflies, no guilt, no excitement. My brain was just in full analyst mode, my internal monologue running like a project manager's checklist. When he leaned in to kiss me, my first thought wasn't, oh my God. It was, okay, API call initiated. Let's see the response time. It was so detached. We went back to his place, and the entire time, I felt like I was watching a user test through a two-way mirror. I was observing, documenting sensory data. I was thinking his approach is less structured, more agile, less waterfall, more scrum. I remember a moment, right in the middle of it, where I literally thought, this is it. This is the missing data point. This feeling of unpredictability. I need to document this sensation so I can reverse engineer the core principle and replicate it with Kieran. It was never about Theo. He was just the other version of the app I had to test to see what features my main version was missing. I was doing it for Kieran, for us. It was the purest form of problem solving. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Why would I? I had successfully identified a critical flaw in our system and acquired the data needed to develop a patch. I was actually excited. I felt like I'd had a breakthrough, like a scientist who just solved a complex equation. The next day, I didn't text Theo. I didn't even think about him. I was completely focused on the next phase, presenting my findings to Kieran. This was the most important part. The data was useless if I couldn't get stakeholder buy-in. I spent the next few days refining my pitch. I literally opened a new file on my laptop and started outlining my key takeaways. I wanted to be clear, logical, and constructive. I wasn't going to just dump it on him. This needed to be handled like a professional debrief. I decided Friday night would be best. We'd be relaxed. We'd have the weekend to discuss and begin implementation of the new strategies. I even made his favorite dinner, a kind of peace offering for the system disruption I was about to introduce. He came home from work, tired but happy to see me. We ate, we talked about our day. It was normal. Then, after we cleared the dishes, I asked him to sit down on the couch. I had my notebook. I was ready. I remember feeling that little jolt of adrenaline you get right before a big presentation. Kieran, I started, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. I love you, and I love what we have. But I think we can both agree that our relationship has been experiencing some user engagement issues lately. He looked confused. Engagement issues? Nicolette, what are you talking about? The spark, the spontaneity, I explained, trying to guide him through my logic. It's been missing. And you know me, I can't just ignore a problem. I have to analyze it, understand it, and fix it. So, for us, I conducted some research to isolate the missing variables. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, just deep, deep confusion. He was trying to follow my train of thought. This was it, the critical moment. I took a breath, ready to present my findings in the clearest, most objective way possible. Okay, I said, flipping a page in my notebook. So I established a baseline with our current interactions. Then I needed a comparative data set. I initiated a short-term, isolated interaction with a control subject, Theo from marketing, to gather direct experiential data on spontaneous intimacy. I looked up at him, expecting him to see the genius of it. I was handing him the solution on a silver platter. I have some incredible insights, Kieran. I think I know how we can fix us. He just stared at me. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. His face didn't register anger or shock. It was worse. It was like watching a computer screen go blank. The processing just stopped. All the warmth, all the life just switched off. The user he had been a minute ago was gone, replaced by this cold, empty shell. Wait, he said, and his voice was flat, utterly devoid of any emotion. Let me see if I understand this. You're saying you slept with Theo. It wasn't sleeping with him, I corrected, a little impatiently. He was getting stuck on the semantics, missing the bigger picture. It was a data-gathering exercise. Theo was a means to an end. The end was us, Kieran. Fixing us. He slowly shook his head, not in denial, but like he was trying to clear an error message. So, to optimize our relationship, he said, and the way he wrapped the word optimize in verbal quotation marks felt like a physical slap. You cheated on me. It's not cheating, I insisted, my voice rising. God, can you please try to see the logic here? Cheating is emotional. It's about secrets and wanting someone else. This was the opposite of that. It was clinical. It was for you. I was going to tell you everything. I have notes. I actually gestured to my notebook, as if that would somehow prove my point. Kieran didn't even glance at it. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were just dead. All the light was gone. My one red line, Nicolette, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The one thing. The only thing I ever asked for. But this is different. Don't you see? I was practically begging him to understand the framework. It doesn't count if the intention was to solve a problem. He let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Wow, he said. He stood up, and it was a slow, deliberate movement, like he was suddenly 100 years old. You really believe that, don't you? He walked into our bedroom. I followed him, still trying to explain the methodology, the variables, the intended positive outcome. He wasn't listening. He just pulled his duffel bag out of the closet and started pulling shirts out of his drawer, folding them with a strange, robotic calm. Kieran, stop, I said, my voice starting to crack with the first real wave of panic. Just listen to my findings. We can fix this. He zipped the bag shut and turned to face me. There were no tears, no shouting, just a terrifying, profound emptiness. There is no we to fix, he said. We're done. And then he just walked past me out of the bedroom and out the front door. The click of the lock behind him was the loudest sound I had ever heard. For the first hour, I was just pissed. I paced around the apartment, ranting to the empty rooms. How could he be so irrational, so emotional? I had presented him with a well-researched, data-driven solution to save our relationship, and he had reacted like a normal person. That was the problem. His reaction was purely emotional, completely devoid of logic. I checked my phone. Nothing. I sent him a text. Kieran, you are having an illogical emotional reaction. I need you to take a step back and look at the data. Let's talk when you're ready to be rational. I genuinely thought he'd read it, cool off, and see that I was right. By midnight, the anger started to curdle into a weird, anxious confusion. He hadn't read the text. I tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't part of the project plan. User rejection of a viable solution was a possibility, but complete system shutdown. Unthinkable. The next morning, I called Jenna, our mutual friend. I needed a third-party validator, someone who could see the logic and maybe talk some sense into Kieran. I launched right into my explanation. carefully laying out the problem, my hypothesis, the methodology of the experiment, and the intended outcome. I was articulate, I was precise. I made sure to frame it as a selfless act for the good of the relationship. When I finished, there was just silence on the other end of the line. For a long, long time. "Jenna," I finally said. "Are you there?" I heard her take a deep, weary breath. "Nicolette," she said, and her voice was tired, so incredibly tired. "Are you listening to yourself right now? Like, are you actually hearing the words coming out of your own mouth?" Yes," I stammered. "I'm explaining why Kieran is overreacting." "No," she said, and her voice was sharp now, cutting through my logical fog. "He's not overreacting. You didn't run an experiment. You cheated on him. And then you tried to present it to him like a fucking PowerPoint deck. You didn't just betray him. You insulted his intelligence and every single real emotion he ever had for you." I started to argue, to bring up the data, the control group, but she cut me off. "Stop, just stop talking about data. This isn't a product, Nicolette. He's a person. You know his history. You know what that one thing means to him, and you went and did it anyway because you thought you were smarter than his feelings. You're not a genius problem solver. You're a smart, crazy person who just blew up her own life. You didn't just hurt Kieran, you destroyed him. You took his deepest wound, and you poured salt all over it, and you called it research." The line went dead. She had hung up on me. I stood there, phone in my hand, and her words echoed in the silent apartment. A smart, crazy person. For the first time, a crack appeared in my perfect, logical fortress, and a terrifying, chaotic feeling started to seep in. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. Right. It's been a few weeks. The official status of the project is terminated. Jenna won't return my calls. Kieran, of course, is a ghost. His digital footprint has been wiped from my life, blocked, unfriended, gone. The silence in the apartment is deafening. It's no longer the calm, controlled environment of my life. It's just empty space. I still talk about it like I'm fine. When I see friends for drinks, I put on a brave face. "Yeah, Kieran and I broke up," I'll say with a casual shrug, swirling the ice in my glass. "It's for the best, honestly. We just weren't operating on the same intellectual wavelength, you know? I need a partner who understands that systems need optimization, not just blind faith." They nod, their eyes filled with a kind of awkward pity that makes my skin crawl. They don't get it. No one does. They just exchange those quick, knowing glances when they think I'm not looking. But then I come home. The logic that used to be my shield, my superpower, is now my torture chamber. I can't sleep. Instead, I find myself standing in front of the big whiteboard in my home office. It used to be covered in user flows and project timelines. Now it's my obsessive postmortem. It's covered in frantic diagrams and flowcharts, my own handwriting looking alien and manic. I'm still trying to analyze the failure, to pinpoint the exact moment of catastrophic system error. Arrows connect boxes labeled user trauma IGNORED and flawed hypothesis. I've written intention Vs, impact, and circled it a dozen times in red marker. But every line I draw, every logical path I try to map, leads back to the same place. A huge, messy scribble in the center of the board where I've written his name. Kieran. I keep trying to erase it and start over, but the stain is too deep now. It won't go away. Tucked away in the bottom right corner, almost hidden, is a small, final note I wrote last night after 2 glasses of wine. It's the only thing on the board that feels true anymore. It's not in my usual confident script. It's small and shaky and barely legible. Hypothesis failed. Data corrupted. System loss.